And then we and I was Brad. I said, "Do you want me?" Not, because I'm not going to take a parent and take them from here. No.
All righty. Good afternoon. Welcome to this 5th presentation of the InterAgency Brown-Bag Lecture Series. On behalf of my partners at the Commanding General Staff School, Colonel Scott Green and Mr. Marv Nichols, I'm Rod Cox with the Commanding General Staff College Foundation, and it's our pleasure to bring you this series, which hopefully enhances your interagency education. This lecture is made possible by our partners, and I want to put a shout out to the folks who actually make this happen, the people from First Command. So JJ and Betsy, thank you. Lonnie and his team here locally. If you aren't investing or you're not interested in, or you don't have something set up, talk to one of these folks to help you. Also, you might notice there's a few folks that have some white sack lunches here. If you're interested in signing up for that program, all you got to do is coordinate with them, and they'll provide you a free lunch here as part of the lecture series. So thank you all for doing that. And you got one extra. Somebody wants it. Go help yourself. There's a hungry colonel looking right there.
What's the captains and majors at?
Oh, the chow line, huh? Okay, all right. Little admin note, our next brown bag and our posters up front. If you haven't taken a picture of that on your phone, I urge you to do that so you have visibility on the schedule for the rest of the year. But the next one will be 28 January, brought to us by the National Geospatial Agency folks. So they'll give a little talk about all the stuff that's happening in cyber in the sky that makes your phone work and your GPS. All right, today's business. Once again, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. The Defense Intelligence Agency. In the often confusing and sometimes shadowy world of the national intelligence community, the Defense Intelligence Agency is probably one of the least understood agencies there is. DIA operates in support of the warfighter as well as in support of policymakers. It operates both overtly with its core defense attachés as well as covertly conducting operations in support of U.S. interests around the world. It's the nation's premier all-source military intelligence organization and provides authoritative assessments of foreign military intentions and capabilities. Now, we're privileged to have with us a member of our faculty who is a longtime DIA officer, Mr. Roderic Jackson. He's the DIA's chair at the U.S. Army Commanding General Staff College and the DIA representative to the Combined Arms Center and Army University. He's got over 30 years of experience in national security affairs with long-term interests in African security. Mr. Jackson has worked for DIA for over 16 years as a military and civilian employee, and during his many assignments and deployments, he's worked as a defense attaché and as a policy advisor to several combatant commands, which include AFRICOM, CENTCOM, and EUCOM. He holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the United States Military Academy at West Point and a master's degree in international relations, international business, and strategic intelligence. He's conversant in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. Please welcome Mr. Rod Jackson. Tell us about the DIA.
All right, thank you very much. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and one of my bigger challenges is not to talk too fast and not to get too emotional about this, but it's really something that I hold dear to my heart. So my first task is to tell you that what I'm going to tell you is my thoughts, is not the official position of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So it's only me and my thoughts. So you can't go back and say, well, Rod Jackson said this and hold their feet to the fire. They'll just squirm and tell me I was wrong anyway. All right, okay, next, I got the control, so I'll get to our first slide. The first thing I want to tell you about DIA is that it's an amazing place to work. I have used every skill that I have amassed throughout, I was wearing the uniform like 27 years, almost 27 years. So it's been a great run, and whether it was logistics, it was just the spot reporting that we did when we were young Army folks, or it was how to wire up a phone and make it work, or how to advise folks on how to get training done or to lead training. I use all those skills. What I tell you as folks sitting in the audience, DIA is such a great place, there's a place for you. Whatever skill you have, whether you're a doctor, teacher, lawyer, tactician or whatever, there is a place for you at DIA if DIA has a need. The real point is that DIA functions because of a group of professionals who work together with a common cause of supporting USG objectives. And that takes a whole bunch of different disciplines across the spectrum so that DIA can execute its mission. I like this slide, but it doesn't do a lot of justice for me, so I use it to kind of explain a little bit more. So we got going about 1961, and that's pretty cool. But in that area, a lot of things happened. And the first thing that really kicked off and made DIA kind of people take notice was the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were intimately involved in the analysis and kind of helping sort that out. Next thing that happened is the 70s. Well, with the 70s, with the Cold War raging and everybody going crazy about who does what to whom, we were instrumental in starting to help dissect what was happening and this whole net assessment thing that we did during that time. When we get to the 1980s, we produced a product called the Soviet Military Balance, I believe, or it was a document on Soviet power. And what this document did, this was like hitting a home run. And this document informed our strategists, our national leaders on this whole quantitative versus qualitative net assessment thing that we used so much to determine who was leading this whole Cold War fight at that time. That document, they ended production probably after the end of the Cold War, but today we have a similar document that's published. It's unclassed. It's a document on Russian military power. So this thing that really helped us get started, helped inform our national leaders so much about a long-term enduring threat is once again at the forefront of DIA's publication efforts. The other thing that happened is we kicked off Desert Storm. About 2,000 DIA employees deployed during that conflict. And that put us on the map that said DIA can not only collect intelligence, analyze intelligence, but they can go out and work on the battlefield supporting the warfighter at the point of battle and make this happen. In the early 2000s, of course, we had the Afghanistan conflict and conflict with Iraq. And from that point on, the warfighter executing missions in the operating environment, got to the point you couldn't extract DIA from that. So DIA had finally came to the forefront, made its name, and was a permanent entity in the whole national security architecture and moving USG forward to accomplish its goals and missions. So that's kind of our history. That's where we are today. It moves us to the point that we are the authoritative voice for all source analytics, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And we are there for our decision makers. And next, I got the slide. And that brings us to our mission. So our mission is to provide decision advantage to our leadership. Quite simply, that means that we are out there learning about our adversaries, our military adversaries. Also, to learn about a military adversary, you have to learn about other types of adversaries, but our focus is military. And with that knowledge, we provide finished intelligence products to our decision makers and our leaders such that they can make the best decisions possible to support USG goals and objectives, or simply put, just support USG. We do that using a host of different employees. We've got, I'm not going to read all this, but I really think the really interesting thing is how many civilians we have, 74 versus 26. We're all over the place, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. But we are a all-source organization that really is what we call, and Rod mentioned it, a CSA, a Combat Service Support. It's Combat Service Agency, which means we have two major masters. Not only do we have two major masters, but we have a whole bunch of customers, or you can call many masters that we work for. And I'll talk about it a little bit later. Okay, so we're also part of the intelligence community. There are 17 of us, and some people kind of debate, but the one in the middle is the Office of the National Director of Intelligence, and that makes up 17 of us. We are a one team, one fight type organization to support USG and what we're trying to do in terms of understanding our adversaries completely from military spectrum to economics or political type issues. We need the whole IC, the whole intelligence community. And so we work together, and that kind of feeds into our responsibilities as to the National Director of Intelligence, how we can get taskings from that agency, from that office, to go out and collect intelligence across a myriad of things. It also means that when there's something that is important to policymakers, they don't just take one agency and ask that agency to report. They take all the agencies. All the agencies, their questions or tasks federated out, if you will, if necessary, to the different organizations. So the right organization with the right capabilities can render the right information, right intelligence, so that they can put together a report that really helps support USJ goals and operations. All right, next slide, please. Oh, I got the clicker. Sorry about that. I'll do it a couple times. So I like this slide in our revised slide deck here, because what this does is it takes DIA and it kind of separates this from the 17 agencies. You'll see some of the service agencies that actually support, that are part of IC on the outer ring there, but it separates DIA and it kind of highlights this whole point they make up top, the authoritative voice of strategic all-source intelligence assessments. What does that mean? Well, what it really means is that when you look at these high-level documents, or such as like a national intelligence estimate, and I worked on several of those at some time in my career, these documents have, each agency has responsibilities related to producing this finished intelligence. So if you take the Army, take issues, for example, like South Africa, and the Army has some responsibility to talk about what's happened with the ground forces, and the Navy has some responsibility to talk about the ports. All that information is collected, analyzed, and is intelligence produced. That intelligence, the DIA is responsible for taking all those inputs, reconciling them, looking at the differences, solving the problems, and making sure that one coherent and approved document that gets at our analytic line, or the approved analytic line, it goes forward to be part of these national estimates, national intelligence estimates, or these national products, if you will. So it's really kind of a collaborative, coordinated, and then it gets to the authoritative piece of making sure that what comes out of DoD is on point and will make the most positive impact with respect to national security for the United States and our allies and partners where necessary. All right, so I'm going to try and spend a few minutes on this slide. It's a good slide because it kind of shows us the, kind of the range of where DIA kind of spans. If you can say simply from the strategic down to the tactical level. When I first started thinking about how DIA works at the tactical level, people say, well, you're going to go out to CGSC and folks are going to ask you questions about the military and how it does. I said, the tactical level, and I scratched my head. I said, I got it. Well, we may not have folks necessarily walking down with our soldiers, but I'm telling you we could. We can do that a couple of different ways. We can do that because it's a problem so significant that DIA puts together a team, or it's put together out of the COCOM, or even from a national standpoint in a national intelligence support team, and they go down and they fix problems at the source. So we can get there and just kind of, on a normal case, day by day, basis, we really don't think of DIA walking around with weapons and at the foxhole. It's just not what we think about. Well, I do think about DIA in three realms, and it kind of follows along the bottom. I think about the National Capital Region, the COCOM area, and then actually down the operating area, and I'll talk about those in a couple minutes. So at the National Capital Region, you'll find all our folks. What we're normally doing there is we got analytical work. You've got analytical work with folks who are advising policymakers that participate in PCCs, or policy coordination committees, that participate in DCs and PCs as required, principal and deputy committees. They're actually promulgating guides on how we exchange intelligence with our foreign partners. They are looking at promulgating intelligence tradecraft. They manage the whole human process for the defense enterprise. So they're doing all these enterprise functions, which enables the services to go out and do their jobs with the right type of guidance, the right type of education and training to get that done. At the COCOM level, and I like to talk about this as a confluence of where DIA meets the services. If you think about the J2 and its intelligence operations, across J2 you'll have mirrored J-type organizations. So you have for example, you'll have a J21 which deals with personnel. they mirror the J2 functions so they can streamline operations and accomplish what they need to accomplish in support of the COCOM commander. These organizations are run by, I would say, probably get a pretty good mix of 26% civilian versus military, just as we saw at one of the beginning slides. And this is where we see DI. The guys don't run around with badges on saying I'm DI, but they're there, the analysts, they are the collectors, they are the folks who do the partner engagement. They are normally, the J2 has either a military or a DIA deputy, and definitely the senior analytical officer at a COCOM is normally a DIA employee. So we're well placed to advise the J2 and consequently the COCOM commander on intelligence operations within the AOR. So you'll see that's where you'll see all the intelligence professionals from DIA. So then when you start to look for them, you won't see them with tags on, but they're running these organizations that actually enable you as an officer or a soldier to do your job downrange as you go into the operational area. At the tactical, at the operational area, you have the embassies, you have joint task forces. In Africa, we have the famous one, CJTF, HOA, and those places are filled with DIA folks at some point. And in the HOA organization, it's very important to have DIA folks who go through there and they maintain this continuity, because the HOA is actually run by a whole host of reservists. So it means every 6 months to a year they're actually rotating out. So it's important to have that lifeblood and that continuity from DIA that goes down there. So you'll see DIA folks working in those type of organizations. At the embassy level, as Rod pointed out, the Defense Attaché and the Defense Attaché's office is run by DIA personnel, whether they're military and civilian, but it's a DIA organization for the most part. And those folks are out advising the ambassadors. Normally they have a representative function. In my case, I was the #2 person on the dip chart in embassy. That did not mean I was the #2 person in charge of the embassy, that was the DCM, but it did mean my representative function or position was pretty high. It also meant that we had the opportunity to really work to ensure that all of DLD's operations in the country were streamlined and that the ambassador was on board with what was happening at any given time. So it's a very important role that DIA plays, and not only is it just military folks, but it's civilian DIA folks who are out there doing those missions at the same time. So as you go towards the foxhole a little closer, we have our collectors. Obviously, the DIA did that as a collector, but we have overt collectors, and we also have clandestine collectors. Some of those guys are even able to penetrate closer to the foxhole, get to the level that they can get the right information that we need to get back and published in the form of published, finished intelligence to our policymakers to help them make decisions. So you see, we kind of think through the spectrum. We go from the strategic all the way down to the tactical. And if you think in terms of realms, we talk about the national capital region, the COCOM areas, and then down to the operational areas where we have the embassies, task force, operational troops on the ground. All right. So there are 4 core competency areas for DIA. And before I start talking about these, I just want to say that when we look at DIA, we are constructed in a centers basis. What that really means is to take different parts of these core competencies and put them together so that when the analyst needs to talk to the collector, he doesn't have to walk across the building to find a collector. He turns around and the collector's there, and he can talk about the great needs for filling a requirement, and that collector can work on it. When we need something from the mission support folks, or the internet doesn't work right, they have those folks in there, right there to help make those decisions, fix those problems at the source. So it's a real great way to bring the right people together in a small team. I think it kind of probably mirrors the PRT kind of concept. General Flynn initiated this process when he came back to DIA, and it's been maybe in 2000. I don't know, it's 10 or 12 or something like that. All right, so first one we'll talk about is operations. Operations, of course, is near and dear to my heart. I won't read all this screen, but I'll talk about defense attachés. So I was a defense attaché in 3 different locations, both the Congos and DRC, which accounts for the French and the Portuguese that I do love a lot. So while I was downrange, I got an opportunity to do all kinds of things, from ship visits to, again, streamlining how information flowed with our partners, coordinate DID functions, helping train English language to the Portuguese who are surrounded by a lot of English-speaking countries or in a community that speaks mostly English. And I also got to see the best of what our partners can provide for us. So it was a great experience. Now, if all you all have traveled, anybody here traveled with a COCOM commander or in large groups? If you've traveled with a COCOM commander or large groups, then you probably encountered these CI individuals. These folks are responsible for making sure that you understand what the enemy's trying to do to you, will do to you, what they're listening to, and how they're doing it, and how to defeat those guys when you go out and about down in Sonola Yard. So they're present in the COCOMs. Obviously, there's a leadership and there's a policy aspect back in the National Capital Region, but in the COCOMs, they're actually controlling the flow of requirements out of these areas to get the information to support those counterintelligence assessments. And the other part I want to talk about is the human folks. So the human folks, you'll see them down there. So, for example, if you are an Army guy or gal, and somehow or another you got a requirement into the system, and it was important enough, it would actually make this interesting route, and this is kind of simplified and theoretic, much more than actual, and make this route and go up to National Capital Region, where there would be lots of vetting in some type of maybe a geographical area for resources, and resources are always scarce, as we know. So the resources would be determined what value it had on this requirement, meaning the importance of it, and then what type of actual resources, whether people or drones or you name it, whatever type of collection platform we could put against it, some priority with that. And if it was important enough, it would trickle back down. Well, it would trickle down anyway because all these things are publicized on a periodic basis. What are the requirements? Or they're viewable, discoverable, if you will. It would trickle down to the human guys who run the organizations at COCOM. And if your requirement was so important, or you could get enough energy behind it, then the folks that run the human in the human section of COCOM can actually task or charge the defense attaché or other collectors with the responsibility to go get this, kind of a dynamic tasking. They could actually say, we need this. So you can see the guys who DIA so it would start with the Army requirement. It would make it up its way through the J2, which you have DIA folks touching it and working it. It goes all the way back up to the National Capital Region. You have DIA folks who are working priorities, they're working programs, they're working to make sure that you have the right mix. You have the collectors who are touching it and shaping it. Then it comes back down to the COCOM, and the COCOM gets to say, this is important. The COCOM guys, again, are staffed with DIA personnel. Goes down to the embassy, which is staffed with DIA personnel in the Defense Attaché's office. The Defense Attaché office goes out and collects on your requirement. It could be because he collected on it because it's a standing requirement. It could be because somebody said, hey, this is important, I need you to collect on it. He actually could have walked over and talked to his brethren and the other intelligence agencies and said, can you help me on this requirement? Maybe NGA or someone else who has different type of capabilities. But at the end of the day, that requirement that you put as an Army guy would have touched some of these places and get back to you in some discoverable form through our intelligence architecture. All touched by the human people in this area. Let's see what we got. Okay, science and technology. So I'm going to confess that this is not my strongest area. What I will tell you, though, is about 2008 when I first started to work on my master's in strategic intelligence, it seemed to be about the same time that the National Intelligence University decided that we needed to create a strategic intelligence discipline. And so the thought was, I believe, to bring in these individuals who understood science and technology into the agency so that we can better analyze information, identify information to get things to get objectives, if you will, targets, and then bring that information in, analyze this information, and get it back out in the form of some type of finished intelligence. So one of the things that I do have had some interesting experience with is the measures in signal intelligence and DOMEX, I guess we call it, documented media exploitation. And so when I was working in the Congo, we had this process we had to go through. Had no idea what it was, and still don't, but we captured it to actual measures. So these things are actual measurable things, if you will, measurable signals. So there are ways that you go out and do it. So you have to get trained on how to use these things, and you go out and you measure them. Also which was really kind of comical, involved in searching for uranium. Now, why would anybody go search for uranium? I had no idea. But I know my boss would come and tell me every once in a while, I said, Rod, we got this guy who thinks he has uranium, and you have to go and look at it. It's like, why me? I want to have more children. But he'd asked me to go. And so I finally, after I'd done this for a while, and in most cases it was false alerts, but I said, listen, I need to figure out what a uranium is, and I need some training. So actually DIA does training, so I went back to DIA. I got this great training about how to use a Geiger counter properly, and I went all over East Africa just Geiger counting and looking for uranium, because no one else would do it, or they were scared to do it. They wanted to have more children, so they'd call me and I'd go do it. So we go out and do these things, and the problem with the Congo is that we got uranium for Congo to do some things with. So there's a lot of remnants around. There's a lot of folks who come up and say, hey, I got uranium. The problem is sometimes they had only small amounts of uranium, but their watches weren't working when they get around this stuff and everything, and I always was kind of wondering what would happen to me next. But it's pretty cool. DOMEX. So if you think Coney, Lord's Resistance Army, you think they use different language. They don't necessarily use, although they're kind of originally Uganda, they don't necessarily use English. They use different languages to communicate. So what happens is if Coney's running around and somebody raises camp or they leave bits and pieces of information, our guys will go out and collect them. So just recently, as I'm looking through intelligence jobs, I see these jobs for these different languages that they speak, that the guys in Lord's Resistance Army use. And I thought about, I said, they need these people because we're still, obviously must be collecting information and finding information, and the only way to get this information interpreted is to have the right type of speakers. And once you have the speakers, it enables you taking this information and putting it into the system. It enables the analysis of this information. It enables the reporting of this information and finished products and the pursuit of Coney, and one day maybe we'll get him, or maybe one day he'll die. So that's kind of the science and technology process. I just want to just add to this one other piece. Cyber is not necessarily my expertise, but when we think about science and technology and things I kind of understood, just open source related to DIA is, our mission related to this area, besides supporting Cyber Command and everything, is that just giving our decision makers decision advantage, we are out looking at these systems, looking at the adversaries, seeing what capabilities they have, and bringing that back into finished reports. We're also looking at how to keep our systems hard or protected against our adversaries. So it's kind of a two-pronged mission. The classic intelligence mission of understanding. You have a question?
Yes, sir. For the advanced technologies intelligence, is that a team in the field that's looking for effectively acquire assets, or is that more of a office-bound doing research on it?
No, they have both. So, for example, you think teams going out and say Iraq, after the conflict, and looking for these active. So it's people actually doing that job, and then so let me put it in a general way. So there are people who are collecting. So you have collectors, and then there are people who have specialized, as kind of talked about the the Geiger counter thing, have specialized talents or specialized skills to go out and do this. And then there are people who are actually sitting around saying, I'm taking this information and I'm going to analyze it and produce a report. So that actually gets us to my most favorite area, and I think one of the bedrock areas in DIA. Because everything that you've seen enables some analyst to put together a finished product which goes to our policymakers. And the way we really affect this whole decision advantage is giving them something that they can act on. Normally that is a finished intelligence product. Or it's some type of an audience where we talk to our policymakers about something. Or sometimes there's certain, just brief communications with them or with their aides that kind of explain where we're going. Or it's enabling our leadership to go and support our positions in the agency on Capitol Hill. So our chief has to go up and support and talk about his quarterly or his periodic progress. And we enable our boss with intelligence products to do that. All right, so this is kind of the greatest thing I think that happens in the DIA. It's the muddy boots area. I think a lot of people, if you haven't been an analyst and if you go and you go do something else, you probably don't have that foundation. But if you've been an analyst, then you understand what collectors can bring, you understand how to put it together, you understand what policymakers need, and so as you go out and you do other things, you have that foundation that gets you, moves you forth in the agency. I call it the muddy boots area. I'm an introvert, so I like to sit at my desk all day long and read about Africa particularly and produce products. And so it's excellent for me. And the National Capital Region, you'll see those guys, and I'll go down to the operating environment, but National Capital Region, you'll see those guys, they're working on these national intelligence estimates I mentioned earlier. They're working on strategic level products. They are working with the COCOMs to provide assessments prior to going down and conducting operations in operational environment, during operations, and even post-operations. So they're across the spectrum, if you will, and across the strat down the attack spectrum, and layered in my realms of the National Capital Region, COCOMs, and down in operational environment. You'll see these guys at the COCOMs, again, the confluence of all intelligence professionals and services working in the J2 as analysts, constructing those products for the commanders' routine briefings, constructing products for commanders operating in the field, and also trying to do foundational intelligence, the intelligence that we need to just kind of understand what's happening and to be able to kind of flex on that when there's a real problem in a certain area. You'll see these guys. One of the things I did that was really, really great was working on the J2 staff, on the warning staff, on the watch staff, excuse me, and watching Africa wake up every day and writing reports on what I saw. And the greatest thing was, if one of the reports merited such attention, get the J2 to actually take that report, read it, flag it, and perhaps give it to the SecDef. It was just kind of like the burner. So I think I really enjoyed that type of experience. It is, probably one of the, again, like I said, the most important important core competency you have, and everything out of all the competencies flow in to support execution of analysis, production towards a finished product. So, in essence, if you have collectors and you can't get it to the policymakers because it's not finished intelligence, I think the value is diminished. So the way to get that done is to get it to an analyst. The analyst produces some product, and that product's pushed forward to our policymakers for review and action. And hopefully it gives them decision advantage. All right, mission support, we kind of talked around this. This is, I think of it as just beans and bullets. A huge part for the architecture in terms of keeping us communicating. If we don't have this, it's just like, the mission folks do all the communications? Yes, they do. They are the blood, if you will. And that's probably enough said about those guys. Okay, so we're kind of getting to the end here, but this is a super, super important part. So when you think about, and as I said, the analysis is super important. We're trying to give our folks a decision advantage. When you think about the operational standpoint, and you go down to the COCOM level, a lot of things we're doing, even at the National Capital Region level, we were working with our partners, because at this point the USG understands that we can't do everything by ourselves. So our partnerships have become that much more important. So at the COCOM level, definitely you have again at the National Capital Region, but at the COCOM level you have a group, actually a division of folks dedicated to working with your partners every day. While I was at AFRICOM from 2015 to 2018, I actually worked with Western partners. What that really meant is that I worked with France. I spoke French every day. I went to have lunch with the French. I went to have dinner with the French, or whatever the French were doing. Well, what we're doing is trying to, one, is identify shared objectives on Africa. Two, we were actually trying to figure out how to collect all those objectives or execute those objectives, because it wasn't always collecting. Some days it's like, we need to go down and look and look for Overwatch, or we need to look to see some bad guy and see, if he has a pattern of life, if you will, or he's around, so that we get the right target. Some days it was actually figuring out what are we supposed to share, and then some days it was actually sitting out, when are we going to sit down and talk about this, and in our next meeting, how are we going to do this, and which language are we going to use, and are we going to talk about targets, are we going to talk about intelligence products, all these different things. So these relationships don't maintain themselves. They actually need lots of work. So I spent a lot of time doing that. The other thing, for all these partners, you have to have a real binding type agreement to share intelligence for the most part. So that's a whole process that one individual in our shop spent his whole time working on these partnerships, the approvals of these partnerships, the legality of these things. And so it's not such a simple thing as, hey, I want to share with you. Well, sharing means certain things to us, but I mean other things to lawyers. And if you don't get this all right, then it won't get approved. So very, very important. All right, so this is kind of my last slide, I believe. And this slide just shows us, kind of recap, is I talked about we're everywhere, 140 plus organizations throughout the world, countries, embassies, COCOMs, you see the COCOMs up there. Kind of wraps up, talks about the integrated piece, integrated centers, and then our core competencies. And I think with that, that's probably enough, and I should open for questions.
Sir?
Yes?
What role do you see artificial intelligence playing in DIA's future?
Well, that's a good question. So what I can tell you is that one of the problems with so much data floating around is data overload. So how do you take all this data and use it effectively? And what data is important, what data is not? So I think when you think about the tools that are available, how can DIA use technology or emerging technology to simplify the job of the analyst such that the analyst can produce better products that have a better impact on the decision-making process of our leaders? And I think that what I can tell you is it will have an important role. I can tell you that there are efforts to try and get a hold of this whole process of what to do with so much data, and that's definitely something that DIA is looking at so that we can do better. So we'll really enable our analysis, enable our analysts, and thereby improve our products. So yes, super, super important role, and it's ongoing. All right, no questions? All right, hope I didn't bore you guys.
Yeah, I have a question.
Question?
If someone's operating at the, let's say, brigade or division level,
Yep.
how might they access DIA or some of the products that they can find useful for their level of command?
Right. So, So the simplest way is that you contact obviously you're dealing with your intelligence. So let's say you're not an intelligence officer. So you're just kind of Joe Schmo officer in the organization. So then you go to your intelligent person, and they actually can go reach back. I think the biggest thing with respect to DIA and all our intelligence community is reach back. So how does this reach back happen? Well, the Army has a system, I think it's called D6, so they have certain systems that they use to reach into the intelligence community that discover these different products. So using the reach back system is one way to get in touch with DIA. So I had a discussion with one of my colleagues the other day, and we talked about this whole chain of command and how this works and should it be stovepiped or not. And the decision was, no, it shouldn't. For intelligence issues, they need action right away in many cases. So figuring out how to develop a relationship with your higher level intelligence folks, if you will, or organizations that may be able to help you solve a problem is very important. It does take persistence because everybody's busy. And if you are dealing with somebody, trying to contact somebody at COCOM, they're busy because they're doing what the commander wants. But with persistence, you can perhaps establish relationships and get the responses that you need, or get guidance as to where you can go to find those answers. So it's definitely kind of understand the intel architecture, understand the reach-back capabilities that the J2s or the G2s of the world have, and then trying to go and leverage that if they will let you in. You had a question?
Yes, sir. For the 0132 civilian intelligence field, who's
Yes.
the proponent for that, sir?
Well, that's a good one. So I really can't give you that answer. All I can tell you is I don't have the answer. It'd have to be. I can ask, but I know obviously I'm familiar with ours, and ours are managed by DIA. I don't know how it's actually managed with the Army and the services.
It'd be by service then?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Another question. All right. I love it. No, ask more questions.
Sir, when you're out there operating, like you said, over in the Congo, were you under the authorities and permissions of the COCOM, or do you fall under?
That's a good question. That's an excellent question. So the simple answer is I was under the authorities and missions of the ambassador, of the embassy, because I was actually assigned to the embassy. But if you come down on a COCOM mission, it's an operational mission, then you'd be, although there's an embassy there, then it's an operational mission. I'm not talking about folks coming in to do TDY, then you obviously there are different rules for that. But for the most part, in a steady state or a permissive environment, if we're going down to work in some area, then you'd have to get cleared by the embassy to come down and work, and you'd be under their rules and regulations, meaning don't go here, don't go that, or whatever.
How does somebody become a defense attaché if they're interested in that?
Good one, and you got to want to hold that one, so I answer. So 15,000 years ago, defense attachés, it was almost like it's the right place, right time. Anybody could do this. You had to sign up and apply. So the first time I knew anything about working in the embassy, I found anything about working in the embassy, they said, hey, you can go work in the embassy and you can speak another language. They didn't necessarily say that, but you can go work in the embassy. I had no idea what they did, what it meant, anything. It's like, hey, I want to go speak another language in an embassy in Latin America. So you used to just could sign up and apply. And so the services got a little bit more sophisticated, understood the importance of the strategic scouts is what we used to call them, and how they could add value to national security. And they developed their own programs. So with respect to the Army, what you would need to do is you get selected. So we had our secondaries. You get selected to a secondary, and then you may not exactly go on to become a defense attaché at that point. You may become a policy advisor at a COCOM. You may become a defense attaché, and if that is the case, you would go, well, not immediately, but let's say further on, you would go through the Joint Defense Attaché School. You go to training, it's about 6 months. You learn the trade craft. You may go on to take some security corporation courses, and then you get shipped downrange to work in an embassy. So it's a process. If not, then you'd go, if you didn't go that route, then you'd go and you'd be a policy person on the COCOM staff, perhaps, or you may work on a G staff, or you may work you wouldn't probably get the DIA right away, or you may work as a ODC. So it's actually more likely that you become a foreign area officer. You get all your training, and then you go down and you work as a Office of Security Corporation in the embassy. That would probably be your first, in many cases, your first job. And then the next time you went down, after you did 2 or 3 years down range, you came back and did another job, you'd probably get an opportunity to go down as a Defense Attaché. And you had another question.
So, sir, with the military human collectors that were there, I've seen a TTP where those military debriefs or reports would go in draft form to the embassy for concurrence before it was actually published.
Right.
Was that in your experience? Did you have a look on it before it made
Right.
the press?
So when I was a DAT, I was Defense Attaché, and I was working in the embassy, everything I wrote went through a vetting process in the embassy. One is to make sure that everyone on the embassy has a chance to chop your work, to add value to it, or actually clarify miscommunications. In some cases, it can seem like it's an unnecessary restraint, there's conflict associated with that in some cases. But for the most part, if you had your embassy wants to make sure everything's streamlined, embassies try and control the narrative of what goes out of the embassies. Not necessarily a negative thing, but they have a particular difference of a thought somewhat than military folks. So that can sometimes cause some consternation is probably a simple way to put it. But for the most part, if it's important to you, you can write your report, and then someone can add a dissenting thought about it, a comment that goes out. So, but yes, you do have to. Most embassies do require you to run that through at least the Paul Austin Press DCM before it's released. I had one former ambassador come and talk to us, and he said, "There's absolutely no way I will let anybody write anything without me vetting it first going out of my embassy." After all, the embassy belongs to the ambassador. So if you're going to send something out that may have some retribution or, receive some pushback, it's probably best that you let the chain of command, if you will, or let the ambassador and his staff see it so that they can actually get ahead of this problem before it becomes one. I'm fired up now. You ask the questions. So much for my talk slowly.
All right, I'll give you
Of course.
one. Can you talk to I was an attaché in Belgrade, so I'm
Okay,
kind of
awesome.
relating to some of your
Yep.
stuff. Talk to the conflicts between the multiple bosses that you have.
Oh, wow.
COCOM, State
Yeah.
Department,
So-
CIA,
Yeah.
Ambassador.
Well, first of all, in an embassy, you're in a fishbowl, so everybody's watching you, looking. So that's very interesting. It requires a certain individual, a certain level of maturity, and folks that comport themselves like adults. That's one. I think when we first started to see the real conflict between the different bosses, especially the 06 level down in Latin America. Go back to 2000, somewhere around 2004, 2007, 2008, all came to a head. So, and I actually had a former attaché, and he said, basically, he told one of the COCOM commanders coming down in this area at some point, "I don't work for you, I work for DIA." Well, DIA has a 3-star, the COCOM commander has a 4-star, and all these stars got tired of all this craziness about who worked for who in whose area and whose backyard, and they went out and said, "We'll fix this." And so I kind of said that they basically rendered the defense attachés less efficient by giving them to the COCOM commanders as senior raters, and basically, which led to them executing more operations that were security corporation related than collection. Now, one way I think DIA perhaps has overcome some of these deficiencies is we have a lot more civilian collectors out and downrange collecting. So that allows to fill the gap from what some of the senior defense attachés were doing. But it did cause a huge fuss. It led to the senior defense official and how to figure out who had primacy, which was another problem because some embassies became, this is really a DIA billet, and some billets, the senior guy was a security corporation billet, so they had to determine who would take primacy. Would it be the defense attaché or the security corporation boss? And then if it was funded by a security corporation, it really was streamlined through the COCOM and through DSCA. And if DSCA, and so if this guy, so in DSCA billets are really based on money, on how much money a particular country is paying or buying with defense articles and services, if you will. So, and then, oh, by the way, did this DSCA COCOM individual require defense attaché training? So there's lots of different discussions, and really what it came out to is the senior defense officer was normally the defense attaché, but not necessarily. And if you happen to be the senior defense official, then you would have to go to some type of defense intelligence training for defense, for DATS. Where you see this the most is in places like Egypt. So Egypt, I worked the Egypt account forever, all at CENTCOM, and so you had, when it changed, we made the change, you had a 06 defense attaché, and so we had a 2-star billet, well, normally got promoted 2-star, was the security corporation chief. So when the change happened, they made the security corporation chief the defense attaché. Never been a defense attaché, probably never been probably likely never had been in working in an embassy in that type of capacity, but it's a general, so he's good to go, he or she. So what the determination was that the generals had to go to some type of executive defense attaché training, or even the full course prior to going down to the embassy, and that solved the problem. So it really kind of, it streamlined the chain of command for the COCOMs. It reduced these fussing and fighting, which really indicates that it was brought on ourselves because we were unable to comport ourselves as adults. And it really opened up the channel for a workaround to really figure out how to get this critical intelligence that we need back in the system with civilian attachés. And those come in both overt and covert types. Hopefully that addressed your question. Any more? I love it. I can do this all day.
All right, thank you, bro.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
I urge if you're still here to take a capture shot of our schedule so you know what dates and subject matters will be for our succeeding brown bags. And once again, thank you. Our next brown bag will be on 28 January, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. We hope to see you then. Thank you, and have a happy holiday season.
Final